All right, let's do this. When I was a little kid, there's a kid in the class ahead of me, and he could dance, and he was athletic, he could run, and he could jump really high. I was like, when I grow up, I want to be a black man. And that didn't happen, unfortunately. But I did want to be a brain surgeon like Ben Carson for a while. And I like the dude. So let's roll tape.
General Braddock, one of the English generals during the French and Indian War. And all of the couriers were killed. And Washington had 2 horses shot from beneath him. And he had 4 bullet holes in his jacket, but no flesh wounds. He had bullet fragments in his hair, no flesh wounds. Many years later, he still hadn't become president yet, but he was back in the area. And one of the Indian chiefs who had been involved was elderly at that point, near death. He said to his braves, "Take me to see this man. I must see him before I die." And when they brought him in the presence of Washington, he said, "Sir, I'm an expert marksman, and I shot you 17 times. And my men shot you." And pretty soon I told them to stop wasting their bullets. And I just wanted to meet the man who was protected by the great presence above. That story used to be in all of our history books until it became politically incorrect.
Why was it politically incorrect?
God. George Washington.
Unanimous. What did your brain have to do for you to respond to that question? Well, first of all, the sound waves had to leave my lips, travel through the air, enter your external auditory mediators, travel down to your tympanic membrane, set up a vibratory force, which travel across the ossicles of the middle ear to the over and round window, set up a vibratory force in the inner lip, which mechanically distorted the microcilia, converting mechanical energy to electrical energy, which traveled across the cochlear nerve to the cochlear nucleus at the pontomedullary junction, from there to the superior olivary nucleus, sitting bilaterally at the brainstem to the lateral meniscus, to the inferior colliculus, and the medial geniculate nuclei, across the thalamic radiations to the posterior temporal lobes, beginning auditory processing. From there to the frontal lobes, coming down the tract of Victor's urine, retrieving the memory from the medial hippocampal structure of the memory bodies back to the frontal lobes to start the motor response at the bed cell level, coming down the cortical spinal tract, across the internal capsule into the cerebral peduncle, descending down to the cervical medullary decusation, into the spinal cord gray matter, synapsing there, going out to the neuromuscular junction, stimulating the nerve and the muscle. So you can raise your hand. And that's the simplified version of what your brain had to do. See if you can get one of those rap singers to do that. But, you know.
This morning for 3 reasons. A gentleman, he loves Jesus. He has a compelling life story, and he is a distinguished man of science and healing. We hope that he can help us sort some things out. May I introduce the Director of Pediatric Neurosurgery at one of the world's great hospitals, Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Dr. Benjamin Carson, Sr. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Mrs. Obama, distinguished guests, which includes everybody. Thank you so much for this wonderful honor to be at the stage again. I was here 16 years ago, and the fact that they've invited me back means that I didn't offend too many people. So that was great. I want to start by reading 4 texts, which will put into context what I'm going to say. Proverbs 11:9. With his mouth, the godless destroys his neighbor, but through knowledge the righteous escape. Proverbs 11:12. A man who lacks judgment derides his neighbor, but a man of understanding holds his tongue. Proverbs 11:25. A generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. And 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sins and heal their land. You know, I have an opportunity to speak in a lot of venues. This is my fourth speech this week. And I have an opportunity to talk to a lot of people. And I've been asking people, what concerns you? What are you most concerned about in terms of the spirituality and the direction of our nation and our world? And I've talked to very prominent Democrats, very prominent Republicans. And I was surprised by the uniformity of their answers. And those have informed my comments this morning. Now, it's not my intention to offend anyone. I have discovered, however, in recent years that it's very difficult to speak to a large group of people these days and not offend someone. And people walk around with their feelings on their shoulders waiting for you to say something. Did you hear that? And they can't hear anything else you say. The PC police are out in force at all times. I remember once I was talking to a group about the difference between a human brain and a dog's brain. And a man got offended. He said, you can't talk about dogs like that. But, you know, people just focus in on that, completely miss the point of what you're saying. And we've reached a point where people are afraid to actually talk about what they want to say because somebody might be offended. People are afraid to say Merry Christmas at Christmas time. It doesn't matter whether the person you're talking to is Jewish or, you know, whether they're any religion. That's a salutation, a greeting of goodwill. We've got to get over this sensitivity, you know, and it keeps people from saying what they really believe. You know, I'm reminded of a very successful young businessman, and he loved to buy his mother these exotic gifts for Mother's Day, and he ran out of ideas, and then he ran across these birds. These birds were cool. You know, they cost $5,000 a piece. They could dance, they could sing, they could talk. He was so excited, he bought 2 of them. Sent them to his mother, couldn't wait to call her up on Mother's Day. Mother, what'd you think of those birds? And she said, they was good. He said, no, Mother, you didn't eat those birds. Those birds cost $5,000 a piece. They could dance, they could sing, they could talk. And she said, well, they should have said something. And you know, that's where we end up too if we don't speak up for what we believe. And you know what we need to do. What we need to do in this PC world is forget about unanimity of speech and unanimity of thought. And we need to concentrate on being respectful of those people with whom we disagree. And that's when I think we begin to make real progress. And one last thing about political correctness, which I think is a horrible thing, by the way. I'm very, very compassionate, and I'm not ever out to offend anyone. But PC is dangerous because you see, this country, one of the founding principles was freedom of thought and freedom of expression. And it muffles people. It puts a muzzle on them. And at the same time, keeps people from discussing important issues while the fabric of their society is being changed. And we cannot fall for that trick. And what we need to do is start talking about things that are important, things that were important in the development of our nation. Well, one of those things was education. I'm very passionate about education because it's made such a big difference in my life. But here we are at a time in the world, the information age, the age of technology. And yet, 30% of people who enter high school in this country do not graduate. 44% of people who start a 4-year college program do not finish it in 4 years. What is that about? Think back to a darker time in our history, 200 years ago when slavery was going on. It was illegal to educate a slave, particularly to teach him to read. Why do you think that was? Because when you educate a man, you liberate a man. And there I was as a youngster, placing myself in the same situation that a horrible institution did because I wasn't taking advantage of the education. I was a horrible student. Most of my classmates thought I was the stupidest person in the world. They called me dummy. I was the butt of all the jokes. Now, admittedly, it was a bad environment. Single parent home. You know, my mother and father had gotten divorced early on. My mother got married when she was 13. She was one of 24 children, had a horrible life, discovered that her husband was a bigamist, had another family. And she only had a third-grade education. She had to take care of us, dire poverty. I had a horrible temper, poor self-esteem, all the things that you would think would preclude success. But I had something very important. I had a mother who believed in me. And I had a mother who would never allow herself to be a victim, no matter what happened. Never made excuses, and she never accepted an excuse from us. And if we ever came up with an excuse, she always said, "Do you have a brain?" And if the answer was yes, then she said, then you could have thought your way out of it. It doesn't matter what John or Susan or Mary or anybody else did or said. And it was the most important thing she did for my brother and myself. Because if you don't accept excuses, pretty soon people stop giving them and they start looking for solutions. And that is a critical issue when it comes to success. Well, you know, we did live in dire poverty. And one of the things that I hated was poverty. You know, some people hate spiders, some people hate snakes. I hated poverty. I couldn't stand it. And, but, you know, my mother couldn't stand the fact that we were doing poorly in school. And she prayed and she asked God to give her wisdom. What could she do to get her young sons to understand the importance of developing their minds so that they control their own lives? And you know what? God gave her the wisdom, at least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was that wise because it was a turn off the TV. Let us watch only 2 or 3 TV programs during the week. And with all that spare time, read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Libraries and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And she put check marks and highlights and stuff. But, you know, I just hated this. My friends were out having a good time. Her friends would criticize her. They would say, "You can't make boys stay in the house reading books. They'll grow up, they'll hate you." And I would overhear them and I say, "Mother, you know they're right." But she didn't care, you know. But after a while, I actually began to enjoy reading those books because we were very poor. But between the covers of those books, I could go anywhere. I could be anybody. I could do anything. I began to read about people of great accomplishment. And as I read those stories, I began to see a connecting thread. I began to see that the person who has the most to do with you and what happens to you in life is you. You make decisions. You decide how much energy you want to put behind that decision. And I came to understand that I had control of my own destiny. And at that point, I didn't hate poverty anymore because I knew it was only temporary. I knew I could change that. It was incredibly liberating for me, made all the difference. And continue on that theme of education. In 1831, Alexis de Tocqueville came to America to study this country. The Europeans were fascinated. How could a fledgling nation, barely 50 years old, already be competing with them on virtually every level? This was impossible. De Tocqueville was going to sort it out. And he looked at our government, and he was duly impressed by the 3 branches of government. 4 now, because now special interest groups, but it was only 3 back in those days. And, you know, he said, wow, this is really something. And then he said, but let me look at their educational system. And he was blown away. See, that anybody finishing the 2nd grade was completely literate. He could find a mountain man on the outskirts of society. The man could read the newspaper, could have a political discussion, could tell him how the government worked. If you really want to be impressed, take a look at the chapter on education in my latest book, America the Beautiful, which I wrote with my wife, came out last year. And in that education chapter, you will see questions extracted from a 6th grade exit exam from the 1800s. A test you had to pass to get your 6th grade certificate. I doubt most college graduates today could pass that test. We have dumbed things down to that level. And the reason that that is so dangerous is because the people who founded this nation said that our system of government was designed for a well-informed and educated populace. And when they become less informed, they become vulnerable. Think about that. Our system of government, and that's why the education is so vitally important. Now, some people say, you're overblowing it, things aren't that bad. And you're a doctor, a neurosurgeon. Why are you concerned about these things? I've got news for you. 5 doctors signed the Declaration of Independence. Doctors were involved in the framing of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, a whole bunch of things. It's only been in recent decades that we've extracted ourselves, which I think is a big mistake. We need doctors and we need scientists, engineers. We need all those people involved in government, not just lawyers. I don't have anything against lawyers, but here's the thing about lawyers. And I'm sorry, but I got to be truthful, okay? Got to be truthful. What do lawyers learn in law school? To win. By hook or by crook, you got to win. So you got all these Democrat lawyers and you got all these Republican lawyers, and their side wants to win. We need to get rid of that. What we need to start thinking about is how do we solve problems? And now, before I get shot, let me finish here. Now, one of the reasons, and I don't like to bring up problems without coming up with solutions. My wife and I started the Carson Scholars Fund 16 years ago after we heard about a survey, an international survey looking at the ability of 8th graders in 22 countries to solve math and science problems. And we came out number 21 out of 22, barely beat out number 22, very concerning. And we'd go into schools and we'd see all these trophies, all-state basketball, all-state wrestling, all-state this, that, and the other. The quarterback was the big man on campus. And what about the intellectual superstar? What did they get? A National Honor Society pin, a pat on the head, they're a little nerd. Nobody cared about them. And is it any wonder that sometimes the smart kids try to hide? They don't want anybody to know that they're smart. This is not helping us as a nation. So we started giving out scholarships to students from all backgrounds for superior academic performance and demonstration of humanitarian qualities. Unless you cared about other people, it didn't matter how smart you were. We got plenty of people like that. We don't need those. We need smart people who care about other people. We would give them money. The money would go into a trust. They would get interest on it. When they went to college, they get the money. But also the school gets a trophy. Every bit as impressive as any sports trophies. Goes right out there with the others. They get a medal. They get to go to a banquet. And we try to put them on the same kind of pedestal as we do the all-state athletes. Now, I have nothing against athletics or entertainment. Please believe me. I'm from Baltimore. The Ravens won. This is great, okay? But what will maintain our position in the world? The ability to shoot a 25-foot jump shot or the ability to solve a quadratic equation? And we need to put the things into proper perspective. And, many teachers, Many teachers have told us when we put a Carson Scholar in their classroom, the GPA of the whole class goes up over the next year. And it's been very gratifying. We started 16 years ago with 25 scholarships in Maryland. Now we've given out more than 5,000, and we're in all 50 states. But we also put in reading rooms. These are fascinating places that no little kid could possibly pass up. And they get points for the amount of time they spend in their reading, the number of books that they read, and they can trade them in for prizes. In the beginning, they do it for the prizes, but it doesn't take long before their academic performance begins to improve. And we particularly target Title I schools where kids come from homes with no books and they go to schools with no libraries. Those are the ones who drop out. And we need to truncate that process early on because we can't afford to waste any of those young people. For every one of those people that we keep from going down that path of self-destruction and mediocrity, that's one less person you have to protect yourself and your family from. One less person you have to pay for in the penal or the welfare system. One more tax-paying, productive member of society who may invent a new energy source or come up with a cure for cancer. They're all important to us, and we need every single one of them. It makes a difference. And when you go home tonight, please read about it. Carson Scholars Fund. carsonscholars.org. But why is it so important that we educate our people? Because we don't want to go down the same pathway as many other pinnacle nations who have preceded us. I think particularly about ancient Rome. Very powerful. Nobody could even challenge them militarily. But what happened to them? They destroyed themselves from within. Moral decay, fiscal irresponsibility. They destroyed themselves.
Is that if you want to watch the whole thing, it's not much longer here. There it is. That was from, I forget. It was Obama's first term or something, maybe. Let's see. What? Oops. All right. Trey Smith. He's kind of wacky. Yeah, he's a little wacky. I would not recommend getting your Hebrew understanding from him. I don't hate the guy. I think he's funny. Like, he's interesting. Looking at the questions. Somebody was asking, Amber, were you wanting to ask a question? What was that? Oh, I see. Oh. God bless Las Americas, lands that I love. Yeah, America. It's funny because Adventists think America will be the beast that comes out of the sea. But that's the thing about history. History is complicated. People always get mad about Islamophobia and how dumb it is because it's like criticized it. Islamophobia is fake because it's like it's not separating the people from the belief system. And Christians invented Islamophobia in their being sensitive about being criticized. Christians are the same way. Oh, you can't talk bad about the Catholic Church. That's mean. You can't. It's like everybody's sensitive. Obviously, I'm sensitive. If you start making fun of my tradition, I'm gonna go like, oh well. It's just funny when people criticize about the dangers of believing Adventist doctrine. Oh, you mean the consistent version of Protestantism that you don't hold to, that you can't argue against other Protestants who talk smack about Ellen White, who are part of churches like it's like, I think Presbyterians are Christians, but if you're going to bitch about our theology, which is your theology being consistent, I mean, do you hate everybody who has a different eschatology view? Is it another gospel? We're just like a consistent version of Protestant theology. Now, if we think back to like how it affected people's lives, Ellen White was calling people who had slaves grieving God, calling it Satan is mocking God when people who claim the name of Christ are dealing in chattel slaves. And it's just funny that someone leaves saying, Adventists aren't saved. I'm a Presbyterian. I'm going to call Catholic people brothers and say Adventists aren't Christians. And while Ellen White, when Adventism was a fledgling movement in Protestantism in America, she's decrying the travesty of slavery, while the Presbyterians are declining to speak out against it. What a joke. What a joke. I don't remember the Adventists saying we should put people to death for breaking the law, but in the early Calvinist Geneva, what happened? Some people's theology allowed for them to be okay with chattel slavery in America. What a perverted claim. Well, God is sovereign. If he didn't want there to be slaves, there wouldn't be slaves. So God obviously wants there to be slaves. He gave these people this plight. Shame on you. And they argued that from their theology. And Adventists were saying, no, that is not right. With many others, Baptists, many others. And there were some Presbyterians that spoke against it. But the leadership said no. And some of these men had personal slaves, and they built their churches and ministry while abusing human beings. How dare you criticize Adventist theology as a Presbyterian in America? How dare you, you little pervert? You have no sense of this. Oh, theology doesn't really matter. Oh, we just have to believe the right propositions. That's what God wants. He's going to burn you forever if you don't believe the right propositions. You're an idiot. You're an idiot. You're a fat American slob idiot. That's what I think of you. I still love you. I still want the best for you. I still want you to preach Christ and give people scripture, but you're an idiot. Shame on you. What a joke.